Today is Monday, October 20th. This is The Signal. I'm Bernice Hillier in Corner Brook, filling in for Adam Walsh, who will be back tomorrow. Today on the show, we are talking about a difficult subject, but an important one: how hateful rhetoric on the internet has a real-world impact. We're looking at how online sexism and misogyny leads to gender-based violence. We don't have to look far to see the role that influencers play online. You open your phone to TikTok or Facebook and a video pops up trying to sell you something or make you believe something. Before you know it, you've gone down a rabbit hole and the algorithm is feeding you messages you might never have sought out. Some of those messages are toxic, hateful, filled with sexism and misogyny. When you have a child or a young person who's getting those messages, where can that lead? Well, to help us understand and answer that question, we have a full panel of guests with us today on The Signal in our CBC studios in St. John's, Gander, and Corner Brook. Joining me here in Corner Brook, we have Paula Shepard, Executive Director of the Corner Brook Status of Women Council. Her organization has been doing work for a while now in the area of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Hello, Paula.
Hello.
Welcome to The Signal.
Thanks so much for having me.
Nicole DeVoe is in our St. John's studio. She's with the organization Thrive, and she is coordinator of an initiative called CASEY, and that's CASEY for short. It stands for the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth. Hello, Nicole. Welcome to The Signal.
Hi, thanks for having us.
And Kelly Hodder is there with you in studio today. She is in our St. John's studio, the Executive Director of Foster Families NL. Hello, Kelly.
Hello, Bernice. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you all with us. And joining us from our Gander studio today, Brittany Landry is chair of the Community Youth Network in Gander and is also an employee of Cara Transition House in Gander. Hello to you, Brittany, in our Gander studio.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So if you want to be part of the conversation, if you are listening today and you have some thoughts to share, we are asking that you text or email us today. The number for our text line during the live show is 709-327-8206. Or you can send us an email at thesignal@cbc.ca. Our associate producer, Arlette Lazarenko, will get that to me, and I'll be able to read them on the air if you have a question for our guest or if you have a comment to make. So we welcome your participation on The Signal today in that way. Nicole, to you, first of all, I want to come to you because I understand that Thrive reached out to us to do a show to raise awareness on this topic. So I'm wondering if we could start with you, Nicole DeVoe. Why is this something we need to be talking about?
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm the coordinator of CASEY, the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth. So our mandate is to help educate and prevent sexual exploitation of youth in our province. We talk a lot. We have a member on our coalition from the RNC, from RCMP, from different organizations across the province. So gender-based violence, sexual exploitation of our young people in the province is something that we're looking at daily, and we know that these rates are on the rise. Statistics Canada will show us that gender-based violence as a whole is on a rise in their province, and our young girls and women ages 12 to 24 are most impacted by this. Rates of online sexual exploitation are on the rise. Rates of peer-to-peer sexual exploitation are on the rise. So we know that sexism and gender-based violence have a direct connection. So when we look at the impacts that social media, this negative influence on our young boys and our young people have, there's a direct connection between what is happening in these online platforms and what is happening to the young boys' attitudes towards women. Sexism is causing an increased rate of sexual harassment. Young boys don't know how to relate to women. They're looking to belong. We talk daily about this need for young people to belong, and that makes young girls, young people vulnerable to sexual exploitation. But the same things that we talk about, the things that we're talking about, grooming, targeting young people, vulnerabilities, young people seeking to have this belonging, The same things that are making individuals at risk of sexual exploitation are also making our young boys targets for these negative attitudes. So our young people are looking for these connections. There's not a lot of young boys that are going out seeking this kind of context. They're looking for a connection, they're looking for answers, and what they're finding is this negative platform that's telling them that the problem is women. And then they're having these negative attitudes that has a direct connection with the violence that we're seeing amongst our young people. So our mandate is to educate and help prevent this kind of harm in our community. So we think that it's very important that this campaign has such a direct connection on the harms that we're seeing in our community. And it is so important to educate parents, caregivers, teachers, young people alike to see the tactics that these influences are using to groom our young people. And what can we do? How do we promote healthy masculinity? How do we promote healthy relationships among our young people? We're living in this new digital age. How do we teach young people to develop healthy relationships in this new digital era? So we just think there's such a direct connection, and it's so important for us to be aware of what's happening. We know that education is prevention, and so if we can educate both adults and youth alike, then we can hopefully try to prevent some of the harms that we're seeing in our communities.
I'm going to come out to Paula now here in our Corner Brook studio. The Corner Brook Status of Women Council has been doing research on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. What have you learned about the experience of people right here in this province when it comes to encountering online violence targeted at women and gender-diverse individuals?
Overwhelmingly, what we found is that it is incredibly common and that it has become very normalized. What we see is that online violence often translates into the real world, the in-person world, in the form of stalking, harassment, and also just changing the norms of what these relationships often look like. Things that may be portrayed as being for protection. Things like asking for people's passwords, the constant monitoring, those kind of things are seen as normal within a relationship, whereas we know that they really aren't. It's actually really much more healthy to have separate interests, to be able to be apart from one another, to understand healthy boundaries and things like that. However, because of this way things are misconstrued online, that, if you are to be with someone, you are going to want to be with them 24/7, and to have access to them 24/7. And that's not really healthy in any way, shape, or form. However, it's become very, very normalized, especially within the dating relationships. And what we see is that this has led to physical sexual violence. We also know that hate crimes overall have increased across the country. And in fact, Stats Canada tells us that reported hate crimes, have doubled between 2019 and 2024, and that they are mostly targeted towards women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA plus individuals, and other marginalized groups.
I want to bring Kelly into the conversation. Kelly, you're with Foster Families NL. People might not necessarily understand where foster care would come into this conversation. What do you see and hear through your work that concerns you on this topic?
So at Foster Families NL, we're very focused on ensuring that children in the foster care system have access to safe, supportive, respectful homes where they're going to have the proper behavior and relationships modeled for them. And so what we know is that kids who are in the system, they've often been exposed to violence. They've experienced violence. They may not have proper role modeling for them in terms of healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. And those things go with kids when they enter care. So we see it as an opportunity where we can educate foster parents to help break the cycle, where healthy relationships can be modeled for them, where they can see, what a healthy relationship looks like. And we want to educate foster parents so, they can begin to have those conversations with young people. And ultimately, if that child leaves care, we want them to leave care, with new tools, new skills, so that they don't go on to perpetuate perhaps the violence or the aggression or the unhealthy boundaries that maybe they witnessed in their family of origin.
Brittany Landry, you're in our Gander studio. You work with, you're a chair of the Community Youth Network there in Gander. You work with Cara Transition House. Brittany, how has the work that you do taken you out into a local school where you actually talk one-on-one with young people? And tell us a little bit about that work and about what you hear in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're considering just the youth in general, they have 3 communities now, and it is friends, family, and online. So we try to get out to do outreach in the communities, in the schools, and we're trying to engage the youth kind of where they are and meet them where they are in that sense. And we ask them questions through like games like trivia and other fun activities about healthy relationships. And we can mirror some of the things we've just heard from the other folks on the panel. A big part of the online access is changing the way relationships are existing. And a big thing that we're seeing with our young women is that they believe it to be normal that they can give their phone to their partner at any demand or request. Passwords are to be shared. What they can post online is to be controlled, and they aren't seeing it as control. So I think that's a big problem for us, just in the youth and the conversations that we're having and engaging what healthy relationships look like. And on top of that, we're engaging with the males as well. And unfortunately, with the access that adults have to youth through online gaming platforms and other, things like Discord, we're seeing the impact of access to inappropriate language and information that they probably wouldn't have access to otherwise. It's somewhat of a form of grooming in the sense that they're inquiring as to what the youth are doing with their partners, and then setting them up for maybe trying new things that necessarily shouldn't be tried between a healthy relationship.
We have another guest who's on the line with us today, and that is Umberto. He is the CEO of White Ribbon. Now, White Ribbon is a movement worldwide of men and boys working to end violence against women and girls and to promote gender equity and healthy relationships and a new vision of masculinity. Umberto, welcome to The Signal. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit, first of all, for people who are unfamiliar with White Ribbon, how did that come about?
So White Ribbon is a Canadian not-for-profit organization, a charity that was created 2 years after the December 6, 1989 Montreal massacre, where a young man murdered 14 women that were at l'École Polytechnique studying to become engineers. He was carrying the hatred, the ideologies, the beliefs that are very much present in today's time, even though this happened 36 years ago. Those kinds of attitudes that women didn't belong in a male-dominated industry, that women should stay at home and not be in schools, that women were to blame for the fact that he himself wasn't able to get into that particular school. He used those kinds of terrible stereotypes and hatred in order to enact that horrible crime. So a group of men in Toronto came together and created the White Ribbon campaign and created the symbol, the pledge to never commit, condone, or remain silent about gender-based violence, and encouraged men and boys everywhere to break the silence and to come forward and support women and women's organizations and speak out against all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination.
Umberto, you now have a campaign on the go, and I've seen it popping up on my social media feed. It's called My Friend Max Hate. Can you talk about what that is and why you created it?
Yes, absolutely. So Max Hate My Friend Max Hate is a global reaching campaign. It was launched last year earlier this year as a means to expose how online ideologies groom vulnerable boys and promotes harmful attitudes towards women and girls and to us LGBTQ people. It's a campaign that uses storytelling and digital media to show how extremist influence influencers manipulate loneliness, anxiety, and identity struggles that many boys and young men experience. And the campaign aims to interrupt the pipeline to misogyny and radicalization by promoting empathy, digital literacy, and healthy masculinities. It's part of our broader efforts, as supported by Women and Gender Equality in Canada, and in partnership with local organizations, including those with us today, to raise awareness, to bring this to the forefront of Canadian consciousness, and to encourage everybody to pay attention, to take action, and to pay particular attention to how boys and young men are being groomed, radicalized in online platforms, and to get everybody to understand the early signs and do their part to prevent this kind of ideology from taking roots in the minds of young people, in our lives, in our communities, and in our schools.
Umberto, who are the boys and young men who would be most at risk of falling prey, I guess, to some of these misogynistic influences?
So these are usually boys as young as 8, but also young men and adult men who are turning to, the internet, as so many of us do for many reasons. But in this particular case, they're looking for connection. They're feeling lonely. Perhaps they've experienced isolation or bullying or exclusion in their real life, and they're looking to the internet to seek advice on belonging, to help them make friends, to connect with communities and groups, and to seek advice on dating, on building their self-confidence, or even for fitness. And they come across these kinds of really problematic videos, tools, resources, and ideologies that at first come across as harmless. They may find them relatable or mildly critical of societal norms, but it very quickly turns into darker type of narratives portraying men as victims of feminism or societal biases. They introduce the us versus them narrative. They blame women. They blame immigrants. They blame racialized folks, the 2S LGBTQ community, for all of men's problems. And these kinds of messages and resources are amplified by algorithms, and it traps young people, particularly boys and young men, in a feedback loop of increasingly radical material. It's very harmful because young people are looking for that sense of belonging, that understanding, and it starts this kind of material starts to radicalize them and turn them into really hateful, misogynistic individuals, and those ideologies very quickly move from online-based messages into real-life behaviors and actions, as we've seen across Canada and around the world.
Umberto, what's in it for the influencers? How do they come to have these views, if indeed they actually hold these views themselves? And then what is their motivation in sharing this messaging?
Yeah, they're looking to benefit from this vulnerability. They're selling their self-improvement type of videos and resources. They are using these algorithms to get young men and men to sign on to their academies, to their channels of self-improvement, fitness channels, and so forth. So they're making millions of dollars out of our young people. They're recruiting these young people to sign on to to their resources, and while paying a monthly fee or a daily fee or per use type of fee, and that's how they're making their money. And they're leveraging that sense of upset, that anxiety, that loss, that sense of trying to find an explanation for their hardships, and making a ton of money out of it. And the more they sell, the more they recruit, the more they promote these ideologies, the more money they make.
How much of this goes on gaming platforms, from what you've learned?
So these influencers, these ideologies recruit from everywhere they can, and young people are accessing these gaming and social platforms at higher rates and younger ages, and they use those platforms to promote those kinds of ideologies, to take out ads to promote their videos and their channels, and that's how young people first start coming across these ideologies, and they buy into them literally and in real life. They take out subscriptions to those videos because they think that they're benefiting from it, but when in fact they are being radicalized, they're being they're being taught to hate women and hate everybody else and blame everybody else for real challenges that they may be experiencing in their own life. I think we need to acknowledge that many young men and boys are feeling isolated, excluded, bullied, and so forth. They need support, but they're finding support in all the wrong places, unfortunately.
Umberto, if I can, I'll ask you to stay on the line. Umberto has been with us. He is the CEO of White Ribbon. We're talking today on The Signal about how online sexism and misogyny leads to gender-based violence. And if you'd like to be a part of the conversation, you can certainly do that by texting to us. The number for our text line during the show is 709-327-8206, or you can send us an email at thesignal@cbc.ca. We're at about the midpoint in our show, and if you haven't been exposed to some of the messages we're talking about here today, it's hard to imagine what kinds of things are said and how that might seep into a person's way of thinking. We all tend to be in our own siloed corner of the internet. So on Friday, I went in search of some of the male influencers that are often talked about and who have dominated the internet in recent years. And here's just one clip from what I watched. This is Nick Fuentes, and I will say that this clip could be upsetting to listen to.
Almost everybody is effectively a feminist. Everybody on the left and almost everybody on the right is effectively a feminist. And when I put it simply like this and say, look, I don't want to hear women talking back to men. I don't want to hear women in public giving men shit, talking back, raising their voice. Women should not have the freedom to wear whatever they want, say whatever they want, go wherever they shouldn't. It should not be like this. And by the way, this fertility crisis that we're having, it has almost everything to do with the role of women, that they're educated, that there was this emancipation, liberation of women. And you say things like this, you say, look, we love women and we respect them and we think they should have dignity. I'm not in favor of cruelty towards women or anything like that. But I think that women need to act a certain way. They need to act like women, and men need to act like men. And that means that men are going to be the boss.
Clip from Nick Fuentes that I found on X, formerly Twitter. Nicole, I want to come back to you in the studio in St. John's. Nicole DeVoe is joining us. She is the coordinator of CASey, which is the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth. Nicole, any thoughts on what we've just heard and whether that is perhaps indicative of what young men and boys would be hearing, or whether that really is just the tip of the iceberg of what they might be listening to?
I think it really is just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot of this. We talk about the algorithms and the ways that boys very, very quickly are being fed more and more harmful content. Gender-based violence is nothing new. We've just heard that, the Montreal Massacre was 36 years ago. This is not a new topic we're talking about, but the intensity and the speed at which these messages are shared in this new online world, that's what's new, and that's what's really terrifying. Like I mentioned before, a lot of young boys aren't necessarily looking for this content. They're looking for a way to belong. They're looking for answers. They feel kind of lost and alone, and this is what they're finding. And they're being fed this message, and I think even more severe messages. And it's hurting not just the individuals that are then experience gender-based violence and hate crimes as a result, but it's hurting men themselves. We hear a lot lately about this epidemic of male loneliness. I think this is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. We have young boys who are looking for something, looking for a way to belong. They're being fed these unhealthy messages. They're being mocked for being feminine, for, having relationships with women, for treating women as equal, even for having relationships with one another. So if we look at this, like, people are looking for a human connection, and then young boys are being told that it's not masculine to have healthy relationships with other men, to have respectful, healthy relationships with women. So they're being made feel even more alone. And then the attitudes that they're portraying, they're pushing women away even more. And so then it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy where boys are being pushed further into this feeling of alone. And then they're seeking out even more of this harmful messaging.
Paula, your website, the Status of Women website here in Corner Brook, talks a lot about technology-facilitated gender-based violence, the work that your organization has done on that. I want to read a line from the website, and I don't think it'll come as any surprise to any of our guests, but it says, while technology-facilitated gender-based violence primarily takes place online, its harm can spread into physical places. With our increasing reliance on technology-facilitated gender-based violence is becoming more widespread and harder to escape. What evidence do you see in your work that it is spreading into physical spaces? You know, the old adage, if, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. How are you seeing the words that are spoken online actually translating into real-world violence?
So as I mentioned earlier, what we're seeing is a real perpetration of activities such as stalking and harassment is creating that fear of safety, concerns for privacy, and also over their own autonomy. Like, oh, can I do this? What are people going to think? There's this constant monitoring. There's also, as I think Brittany said, there are more than one community that people are living in now. It's not just our work in our home or our school in our home. It's this online community where everyone is there. And we don't feel like we can actually turn that community off because it's also where we go for support. So what this turns into is often what we see is people are starting to self-censor. They're removing themselves from the public sphere, and that's in attempts to avoid upsetting or becoming a target for those who do engage in online violence. And we know, unfortunately, this doesn't solve the problem. What it may reinforce is actually the idea that spewing hate will silence individuals. It may actually embolden them. And we also know that it has impacts in terms of financial and professional opportunities because people may avoid public-facing or leadership careers because it means that they may need to be in the public where they're more likely to take some of those both online and in real world attacks on both their personality, their lifestyle, any number of things that are kind of up for grabs now to be reviewed, commented on, and, targeted for.
Paula, at what stage is your research? Because this is an ongoing project.
It is. So Katie Giffen, who is our primary lead for this project, has just completed focus groups across the province as well as an online survey. So she's just compiled some of the analysis around that. So our project is actually moving into the stage now of developing resources and looking at recommendations. And that includes everything from legislative recommendations through to resources that can be used within schools and by families that can help them address some of these issues. Because we know, as we've all been talking about these algorithms, right? They are self-fulfilling prophecy that once we start looking at something, we tend to see more of it. It becomes a self-confirming bias, right? And we know that the most engaging content is often the stuff that's most harmful, the misinformation, conspiracy theories, things like that. So there needs to be some real education around how to critically examine some of these messages to understand if they are real, what is based in statistics and facts and things like that, and what isn't. And once we start doing some of that critical analysis, we can start to look at the foundational kind of pieces around this and start to build from there.
Paula, Umberto brought up the idea that, this has been around. Of course, White Ribbon started in the aftermath of the Montreal massacre. You've worked in this field for quite a while. How have you seen a shift in thinking, or at least in the public-facing, open dialogue that is happening in the media, social media, on this topic? Because I think when the Montreal massacre happened, many of us who were young women at that time were thinking that was just an isolated viewpoint, that not very many men would hold to that view, that they were pushed out because a woman had succeeded in getting access to an engineering school.
Well, I think you're right. I think at the time we very much thought this was a one-of. What we see now is that these kind of behaviors are very commonplace. We have people who've achieved great power and status by taking on these viewpoints and selling them, empowering people, or perpetrating to empower individuals to belong to a group, to act in certain ways, to reclaim their power away from women and feminists. One community that we know about is incels, so involuntary celibates. So those individuals describe themselves as being stripped of their right to have sexual relationships with women. Because women choose to then have sex with more attractive or more masculine, or what they deem alpha males, as though we have no ability to make that choice ourselves. They believe that the rise of feminism has led the sexual market to be dominated by women, when they actually believe that women should be dominated. And again, we thought of these kind of things as one-ofs. But what we see now is that this is very much commonplace kind of thinking, and it's also turned into real-world violence. We know that in Toronto there's been shootings. There's also been drive-by, incidents in which people have been targeted because of this idea that men are owed sex and relationships, and that women are keeping them from it.
Nicole, what are some of the warning signs that someone might be falling victim, might be, becoming radicalized by this type of content online? What should people be aware of? Parents who are listening, perhaps, be aware of. Educators.
I think we really have to keep a close eye on our young people today for so many reasons. We talk a lot about the warning signs of individuals being victim of sexual exploitation, and now, on the other hand, victims of these types of misogynistic viewpoints. And I think they are a little bit the same. We have to really keep an eye on our young people and see what those changes are. Are our young people becoming more withdrawn? Are they becoming more moody? Are they becoming more angry? Are we seeing changes in our young people in a negative way? And what are we doing about that when we see it? One of the big things, as adults, we need to be aware of what is targeting our young people. A lot of times we're not even aware. We talk a lot of the times about how we won't let children go to the playground anymore because it's too risky, but we'll hand them a phone, and we think that that's safe. We think that putting our young people in front of a tablet or a phone, but keeping them in the house where they're safe. The thing that we need to do is be aware of the content, the messaging that these young people are experiencing. So if we're just handing our young people phones, tablets, and we're not even aware, because I think a lot of adults have no idea the harmful messaging that young people are being exposed to. So I think the first thing, before we even look at the signs, we need to know that this is even a reality, because we might look at those things and think, oh, these are just normal teenage behaviors, right? Okay, our kids are in the room a lot, they're withdrawn. It's always been this way. Kids have always reacted in this way. They're teenagers, right? But we need to be aware that there can be much deeper things going on. So if we see our young people becoming more withdrawn, more moody, more angry, we really need to dig a little bit deeper and see what's happening there. And open communication and dialogue. It's been said a lot of times throughout this episode today that connection, healthy connection is what's so important. So we need to keep those lines of dialogue open with our children. We need to not be afraid to ask the hard questions, to have the hard conversations, so that when we see something that is, not sitting right with us, we need to not be afraid to sit with our young people and ask what's causing that.
Kelly, your organization works with children, specifically children in care, and I'm just wondering how much conversation is there about this among your foster families, the people that you represent and work with?
There is a great deal of concern among foster families right now about this concern. We currently have about 600 foster families in the province, and I would say we hear from some of them on a weekly basis on this very topic. They have kids placed in their homes who have trauma. They've likely experienced or witnessed violence. They have not been exposed to healthy relationships and what that looks like. And now they're in this foster home, and that young person likely has access to a phone or a tablet or a laptop. And the foster parents are seeing, they're seeing the unhealthy content that the young people are consuming, and they're very worried because they are actually seeing this play out in their homes. They're seeing it play out in the schools. They're getting calls from the teachers about what's happening amongst these young people in the classrooms. And they can say that there is a direct link between the behavior they're seeing and what these young people are consuming. And again, the foster parents, they want to help break the cycle of the violence, of the misogyny, the unhealthy relationships. And they need the tools to do that. For a lot of these foster parents, this may be the very first time they've cared for a teenager. This could be their first placement. And so they're kind of, going into this saying, what do we do? Like, this is big and we need support. So that's some of the work that we're doing. We're trying to give foster parents the tools, the signs to look out for, and how to start those healthy conversations with the young people. This doesn't have to be taboo. I feel sometimes foster parents are afraid to broach the subject with young people around this, but we're trying to share the message. This needs to happen. Like, there are ways to have healthy, respectful conversations about this, and ask young people, what are you hearing online? Or even, share an article with them and say, what do you think about this? What are your views on this? That can be a very effective tool to help open up the communication channels and kind of really start to tease out what some of those attitudes are amongst our young people.
Brittany Landry, you're there in Gander, and one of the things you use to get conversations going is trivia, as well as some games that you have brought into the school there at Gander Collegiate to have conversations with young people. What would you say about what can shift the conversation? How do you de-influence someone who started to fall prey to some of this messaging?
Yeah, so I think, especially coming from the pandemic, online access was such a way for individuals to learn how to communicate. So we've really gotten on board with getting in the schools, getting in the youth centers, and engaging one-to-one or in a group environment. I think the best thing you can do is listen, obviously, but challenging some of the mindsets and also turning the tables back on them and say, how would you feel if I did this to you? And because I'm an adult, they don't like it, but because a partner's doing it, it's acceptable. So it's really trying to identify the language and stuff that they're using, and understanding too that the communication styles have been affected based post-pandemic, and what that means for them having to engage with an adult from face to face, and that is very difficult for a lot of our youth. They spent some of their most informative years and the years that they should have been learning to grow in communication styles or learning different communication styles. They learned it online, and so we've gotten away from. If you're in person with someone and you've harmed them, you can see it on their face. Maybe others would disagree, but if it's online, there's a lot less backlash. There's more engagement from others who maybe encourage that. And so you're just looking at the difference of how they're learning to communicate kind of at an older age, which we haven't seen pretty much before in history.
And Brittany, what about, even on basic issues like consent? Do young men understand consent in the way that you would hope young women understand consent?
I think it really does depend, and I think it's having that conversation of encouraging them to maybe isolate what their version of consent looks like. For the most part, the youth again, they're hearing everything through video games and through these adults who are kind of penetrating their online community, probably not for the best of intentions, and they're hearing what consent looks like for this grown adult. And we can be sitting around a table and the youth will bring it up, and they kind of do it nonchalantly, but they're actually engaging in a way that they want an answer of how is Brit going to respond to me saying this. And I think that's what we look at in terms of engagement, and just really trying to reframe maybe what they've learned or what they've absorbed, and they're not really aware that it has become part of their vocabulary or how they interact with another person. There is still a concept of right and wrong. It's just trying to adapt and learn what the youth believe is right and wrong, and then maybe refocusing it a bit better for them.
Umberto, I believe you're still there on the line, CEO of White Ribbon, and I wonder if you could speak to this issue of de-influencing or positively influencing young men and boys to have different attitudes than what they might be seeing perpetuated online. What would you say about the best way to go about that?
So the best way is prevention, right? It's starting these conversations at younger ages, because youth are being exposed to these ideologies and this hatred earlier and earlier. And we have a tendency in our education system to leave it until later, until grade 7 and 8, to start education about consent and healthy relationships and so forth. And as we're seeing, it's already too late. So start younger. And this is a role for parents and educators and everybody to have, really, is to start these conversations, start talking about consent in age-appropriate ways. For example, boys as young as 3, 4, 5 years old, we can help them understand consent by talking about, asking permission before sharing, before taking a toy from their friend or their sibling, right? And just as we do with math and language and geography, we start introducing the basics of these concepts, and then we build on it later on as young people age and start to understand the more complex aspects of healthy relationships and consent. So that's key. We need to talk about safety and technology. We need to keep boys and young men safe as well. We know that girls, young women, to us LGBTQ folks, racialized new immigrant youth are at greater risk of being on the receiving end of these hatred ideologies and this misogyny and this homophobia. But we know that boys and young men themselves are being targeted too by adult men, primarily through extortion, through sextortion, in fact, where someone pretends to be romantically interested in a young person, asks them to share intimate images over these platforms, and then uses those images to blackmail that young person. And we've seen some very high-profile incidents of what happens when young people are not able to cope with this. They're not able to share that experience with with their family members, with their educators, and it often leads to very harmful consequences. And so we need to prepare young people much earlier, much more in advance, so that we can inoculate them, so that when boys come across these ideologies, they know that they are problematic. They're more likely to reject those kinds of harmful norms and stereotypes and misogynistic and homophobic ideas, because their parents and their educators have already, educated them about this. We know from research that a high number of educators are seeing the impact of these sexist, misogynistic ideologies in real life in the classrooms. We know that parents are increasingly concerned about their boys and young sons being exposed to these harmful attitudes and ideologies online. Yet, the majority of professionals tell us that they lack the training, the support, or the resources to be able to teach young people about this. So our decision makers, our policy makers need to pay attention to this as well, and need to make sure that they're working with organizations like those of us around the table today to create the resources and the programming in order to proactively prevent young people from of being radicalized into these ideologies. And folks can visit our website at whiteribbon.ca or follow us on social media to get more access to those tools, to lesson plans, to research, to tips, the things that everybody can do in the home, in the school, in the community to make a difference on this.
Umberto, I want to thank you for your participation in the program and in our conversation today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
That is Umberto, CEO of White Ribbon, and you can check out their website and the resources available there, whiteribbon.ca. Paula, how important is it to have men and boys as part of this conversation, as we have today?
So incredibly important. We know that all young people are influenced by many things that are happening, and we can't just be educating one part of the population. I want to go back to one of the things that was talked about in terms of consent. So it is incredibly important that we have these discussions about consent, and we need to do them at earlier ages. One of the concepts that really needs to be hammered home is the idea around coercion. One of the major differences we see is that when we talk about coercion, because we also go into schools and we talk about consent, we talk about bystander intervention, we talk about many of these topics. But one of the major gender differences we see is when we talk about coercion as it relates to kind of that peer pressure or the wearing down of somebody, the continual asking. So what we see is that many of the female identifying individuals in that room understand that when we have a scenario where someone continues to ask and continues to ask, even though there's initially been a no, even a couple of times there's been a no, but they continue to be, harassed in many ways to continue to ask that question. Many of the females in that room understand that, okay, if I say yes, it's because I felt fearful. I was concerned about the consequences of continuing to say no. Many of the male identifying individuals in those classrooms do not see that. They understand that, oh, well, I got a yes, so I have consent. So helping them understand those pieces of coercion is also incredibly important, and helping them all be in that same environment to have those discussions is also really important so that they can hear one another's views. But that was a piece that really kind of stood out for us, that there is this difference, that if they say no, and then eventually say yes after I've asked them multiple times, that's a yes. Whereas the other side of it is that, no, I actually was concerned about what would happen if I continued to say no.
Nicole, I wonder if you can talk about the role that peers play in either reinforcing or challenging the misogynistic attitudes that we see played out online.
Well, I think that's really important. You just had asked, is it important to have boys and males a part of this conversation? And I think when we talk about that and then we talk about peers, it's so important. So we go and we talk to young people as well. And we talk about how we need to sometimes be uncomfortable. We need to sometimes stand up and call out our peers. And I think for young boys and men, it's really important for them to have the strength. We, hear a lot about the locker room talk and how normalized it becomes. And we need to get boys and young men who are comfortable with who they are and are able to stand up to their peers and say, this is not okay. The jokes, we hear a lot about jokes, and they can be very, very harmful. So we need young boys and men who are a part of this dialogue, who buy into what it means to have a healthy masculinity, to have healthy relationships with females, and who are strong enough in themselves to stand up to others, to call out those jokes, to call out this sexist attitudes and harmful things that are happening in schools. We're not going to reach every single child and youth at the same time, but if we can get across that to some of our young boys and they can have that strength to stand up to their peers and to model those healthy relationships, then I think that's a really big part of it.
Nicole, let's remind people, we're into the last 10 minutes of our program now, just let's remind people who are listening today, the parents, the grandparents, where is this happening online? Where should I be concerned if my young person is spending time somewhere and I think, oh, that's just, they're video gaming or whatever? Where are some of the places, in what contexts online are youth being exposed to misogyny and toxic masculinity?
I'm really glad you asked that, because the answer is everywhere. We do a Casey training where we talk about online sexual exploitation, and every single time we give that training, we have someone bring up another new app, another new platform that they're hearing about these sorts of things happening. So it's happening absolutely everywhere. So sometimes, as parents, we think that Minecraft and Roblox and, the video games and things that, young people are doing it. We live in a new digital era. Everything inherently has risks. We talk about, driving a car is risky, but we get a license. We wear a seatbelt. We do things to protect ourselves. Being online at all on any app, on any platform, is inherently risky. And exploiters are so good at what they do. And so as quick as we might address one app or one way that young people are being targeted, there are new and better and scarier things coming about. So I don't think that we can fool ourselves into thinking just because our young people are just on this app or just playing this video game or just that, we're safe. We can look away. Our job as parents are done. We can feel a little bit better about ourselves. Casey has developed a lot of materials on online sexual exploitation in the last year, and that talks about how we put safety provisions in place on the internet for young people. And that's great, and we need to keep educating ourselves on how we use the internet in safer ways, and we need to be aware. I know Snapchat, we work with CASA, the RNC department, and they say that Snapchat is a really scary, it's in a lot of the files that they see that have gender-based violence have some component of Snapchat. So there are apps, there are platforms, there are things that are maybe a little bit riskier and scarier and more of this happening, but it is happening absolutely everywhere. So we can't just kid ourselves and think my child is, only has this app and this app or is only playing this video game. Any device or any game that has a chat function, there's always that risk that they're going to be hearing these misogynistic views, that these opinions are going to be leaking in. So I think as parents, we need to be really on top of that and aware of it and educate ourselves and know that if our children are online, that is a risk in itself right there.
Nicole, where can people find out more about the resources that are available through the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth?
Yeah, so if you visit Thrive's website under Casey, you will find the resources that we've developed. One of the things that's been talked about is consent. So we do have a poster on the age of consent in Canada. It's something that we've developed as a result of going into schools and hearing kids say, oh, we learned about what consent was today. And that was really terrifying that young people, didn't quite know what consent was to begin with. So we have a poster on there on what the age of consent laws are in Canada that we've been bringing to schools and community centers and trying to educate our young people what consent is. You can always find those resources and print them online or reach out, and we can give those handouts and pamphlets and posters to your organizations as well if you're interested.
And the website is thrivecyn.ca, right?
Yes.
And Kelly, what about for you, as a person who works with foster families, what is your best advice to parents in terms of what they need to be aware of?
Be very in tune with your children's activities. A lot of parents today, and I've been guilty of it myself, if you hear your child in the room and they're having a great laugh on their devices, you think, oh, that's wonderful. They're talking to their friends, they're connecting with their friends even though they might be in their bedroom. Don't assume that it's all okay. Ask questions, be curious. Don't be afraid to open up conversations that may feel a little uncomfortable, but they can go a very long way in preventing long-term harm.
And Paula, maybe a final word to you, if we have time. Just where would you suggest people might be able to access some resources to help them with these conversations that they're having?
So there are some national resources that are fabulous. Cybersafe.ca is a great place. But I would also check in with, your teachers. Find out what is actually being taught in the classrooms. What are they learning? Are they being given any skills around how to protect themselves online? to assess whether a site is safe or not. Have those conversations also at home. Find out as a parent what it is that they're involved in, what they're looking at, and how do you as a parent help put some tools in place that may be able to protect them a little longer.
All right. We are getting ready to wrap up the program. I want to thank all 4 of our guests who've been in studio. We've also had a guest on the line who was with us, and he's the CEO of White Ribbon. Umberto was with us. Brittany Landry and Gander, thank you very much for coming in on the program today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Brittany Landry, chair of the Community Youth Network in Gander and an employee as well of the Cara Transition House. Thank you to Kelly and Nicole in our St. John studio. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Kelly Hodder is the Executive Director of Foster Families NL, and Nicole DeVoe is coordinator of an initiative under Thrive, which is called the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth. You can get all the details on their website. Thank you to you, Paula, for joining me as well.
Thanks so much for having me.
Paula is the Executive Director of the Corner Brook Status of Women Council.